Our scripture for today comes from the Gospel according to Luke in the 13th chapter, and I'll be reading the 10th through the 17th verse. And it says, "Now he was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath, and just then there appeared a woman with a spirit that had crippled her for 18 years. She was bent over and was quite unable to stand up straight. When Jesus saw her, he called her over and said, 'Woman, you are set free from your ailment.' When he laid his hands on her, immediately she stood up straight and began praising God. But the leader of the synagogue, indignant because Jesus had cured on the Sabbath, kept saying to the crowd, 'There are 6 days on which work ought to be done. Come on those days and be cured, but not on the Sabbath day.' But the Lord answered him and said, 'You hypocrite, does not each of you on the Sabbath untie his ox or his donkey from the manger and lead it away to give it water? And ought not this woman, the daughter of Abraham, whom Satan bound for 18 long years, be set free from this bondage on the Sabbath day?' When he said this, all his opponents were put to shame, and the entire crowd was rejoicing at all the wonderful things that he was doing." When I checked to see what the lectionary text was today, I was hesitant to focus on this text because it's very difficult to preach from texts like these, because if you're a church-going person, you've probably heard this scripture and heard sermons from this scripture many times. Most preachers focus on the woman and what burdens in her life had caused her to be bent over, and the fact that Jesus noticed her and healed her without expecting it, or even approaching Jesus for it. She just went to the synagogue to worship, which was her normal practice on the Sabbath. There's so much I could say right there, because it's true that most of us have some sort of real physical ailment, spiritual ailment, or emotional ailment that seemingly will not go away, no matter what we do. I wish it were true that Jesus was going to join our worship, get online with us today, and miraculously bring healing to all of our situations. I would definitely take that miracle, because like the woman in this story, MS has me frequently bent over. But I do still believe miracles can happen. I read about a woman who came back to life after having no pulse for 45 minutes, or about a little boy who fell into an icy stream and was resuscitated after nearly 2 hours of CPR. Or I read a story about a man who God showed him the power of marriage in a weird way, because he was in a life-threatening holdup. And when the robber pointed the gun and pulled the trigger aimed at this man, he put his hands up, and it was his wedding band that blocked the bullet from hitting him. And I look at my own miracles, like how somebody could go from being someone who could not even sign my own name 22 years ago to now being an information security IT project manager, juggling 3 major projects and having major leadership sight on me, and me doing well at it. Like the woman in the story, I wasn't expecting this level of healing. But God is truly amazing in God's own time. Perhaps our task in life is to do like this woman did. Just do the best we can do. Make the steps we can make. And just know that God sees us, and God is there for us, and sees beyond these cloaks that society uses to render us invisible. These cloaks of racism, sexism, homophobia, ableism, all these things that God sees through, but yet sees us. So let's learn to celebrate the miracles that come into our own lives, and when we see miracles in somebody else's life. Now I'm going to just go ahead and be transparent and admit this may seem like I'm preaching two different sermons today. But given the current state of the country and the world, there are other critical aspects of this text that arose as I was viewing it this time. And those were all centered around the leader of the synagogue and his reaction to what Jesus did for this woman. Rather than marvel at the amazing restoration of a woman who had been living with a spirit that had had her crippled for 18 years, and when we say spirit, from their translation, what they were thinking of was what we would call an illness or an ailment. They didn't have the medical expertise in their times to diagnose or to treat these situations. So they called them a spirit. They figured it was some sort of demonic possession. But a condition that would have only caused her pain and discomfort in our days, because we would have had ways to treat and to heal. But in her days, the condition that she had would have caused her to be alienated or oppressed, definitely would have caused depression and loneliness. But the leader says nothing positive about this amazing thing that Jesus did to free this woman from her condition. But instead, the text says he became indignant about Jesus curing on the Sabbath. The text says, but the leader of the synagogue, indignant because Jesus had cured on the Sabbath, kept saying to the crowd, there are 6 days on which work ought to be done. Come on those days and be cured, and not on the Sabbath. You know, I had to look up, well, wait a minute, indignant, why? I had to actually look the word up. I'm like, well, maybe I'm looking at it wrong, because I couldn't understand why this leader of the synagogue would be so displeased and offended and resentful, which is what the word means, or deem that Jesus was unworthy. I guess Jesus caused this leader of the synagogue to defend what he had been taught and what he had believed all his life. Kind of like there are so many today who want to maintain a certain unjust, unequal status quo even today, because it's what they learned, it's what they were taught, it's what they feel entitled to. In the text, the writer of Luke raises the moral issue of interpretation. Because yes, it's true that Exodus 20:9 and Deuteronomy 5:13 do state, for 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But in God's realm that Jesus introduced, the world changes a little bit. And our view of the text changes a little bit. Because Jesus introduces us to a world of life, love, and positivity and hope, not law. He doesn't confine us to what tradition says or what historical interpretations has said. He says sometimes when the law says no, life and love say yes. That's why sometimes civil disobedience may seem wrong on paper, but it's often right for life. It's very curious to note that the text says, out of his state of indignation, the leader of the synagogue repeatedly told the people it was wrong to heal on the Sabbath. I guess he figured if you say something repeatedly, it will make it true. Like I think it's referred to the illusory truth effect, that makes some people think that false statements, if they're repeated over and over and over again, those statements will miraculously become true. Like statements about what happened in the 2020 election, or statements like about what happened on January 6, 2021. A study at Vanderbilt University found that repetition can affect a person's ability to detect the truth, which means we need to stop and think, what really is true? What really is best? And what really is most loving? Are grace, care, and love confined by the categorization of work? When they said no work should be done on those 6 days, does that mean that grace and care and love can actually heal on the 7th day? Or are they confined to just those 6 days? In God's realm, there's a new reality where grace and love are the molecules that make up this reality. They are more real than laws, traditions, and even scriptures. Please don't let anybody quote scriptures to you to prove their point or to support their argument. Don't engage. Let your moral interpretations be filtered by the love God shows to all of us. In the text, however, Jesus did respond after a while. Although the leader of the synagogue spoke to the crowd rather than speak directly to Jesus, Jesus didn't do that. Jesus turned right to the leader of the synagogue and responded directly to him and pointed out how wrong they were for being hypocritical and hiding their hypocrisy behind scripture and tradition. We're living in a time when people use Christianity as a weapon to justify maintenance of an unjust status quo. And it's only going to get worse, I'm telling you. In the United States, I remember as a child having to repeat those words every day before class started, and it included one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice, not for some, but for all. It seems like that vision is far from the truth. And some are going to use religious dogma and religious rhetoric to bolster decisions and laws that divide communities further and further apart. That's what was happening in the time described in the text for those who originally heard the text. There were those who held to tradition using lenses of injustice, fear, and a desperate status quo that they were trying to hang on to. They were even using that to interpret their sacred texts. One of the commentaries I read put it this way: by forbidding such conduct, meaning healing on the Sabbath, they, meaning the synagogue leaders, put themselves on Satan's side in the struggle for human lives, and they became enemies of Jesus. When I first read that quote, I thought it was pretty severe. Enemies of Jesus? But then I thought about it, it makes a whole lot of sense. If Jesus's main reason for being was and is to bring about the realm of God where grace and inclusion are the way, then those who block those love-based qualities, often with fear, negativity, and separation, are in many ways, enemies of love, hence they're enemies of Jesus. We need to be clear what side we're on and what side we're committed to. Are we committed to a reality where love and justice are our goal? Where grace sometimes compels us to go against the grain, goes against the status quo, to fight against an injustice in the name of love? What are our moral interpretive lenses? Are we enemies of Jesus or companions in God's realm? This 13th chapter of Luke ends on a very ominous and somber note. The last verse says, "Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often have I desired to gather your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing." Sometimes this seems like a fitting sentiment for even our current world issues. But this doesn't have to be the ending of our story. I'm glad today that in 2022, we still have the opportunity to be on the right side, to be prophets of peace and justice, even as difficulties and divisions persist. We can be the ones to bring the healing. We will speak the words of hope. We will build bridges instead of building walls that separate us. As we go about our lives, we can still believe that miracles happen. They happen around us all the time. We just overlook them. I invite you to look back over your own life and you make a list, because miracles have happened and are happening in your life even right now. So let's believe that Jesus can still make a difference. Let's believe that love still makes a difference. Let's believe and have the hope that miracles still happen. And let's not be enemies of Jesus, but rather let's be companions, present day manifestations of what Jesus would do in our day and our time. Thank you for listening.